So good afternoon, everyone. This is Robert Guenther at United Fresh Produce Association. We want to welcome you to our first of three Washington Conference webinars we're going to be hosting over the next several weeks. We're excited to have you with us today. We're excited to have Mark Klompien, our chairman of our Government Relations Council, as well, joining us today. This is a great way to kick off the start of getting educated and learning about the Washington Conference. So before we get started, let me walk through a little bit of kind of what we'll talk about today. We're going to do, obviously, why it's important to participate in the Washington Conference. And then Mark's going to share some of his perspectives about why Washington Conference is so important. I'll then touch on some of the policy priorities that will make a difference. So in other words, some of the things that we see happening in September, some of the policy areas we see happening in September that will really kind of drive a lot of the discussion we have during the Washington Conference during the week of September 21st. Then we'll dive a little bit into the schedule of events, so share with you some of the schedules, speakers, education sessions, and then we're going to do a preview of the virtual March on Capitol Hill, and we're going to actually, you will be the first group of people to have a sneak peek of kind of what we're doing with our virtual March this year. Finally, we'll do questions and discussion, and then we'll wrap it up at the end of the hour. So for your questions and discussion, please use the Q&A function in the Zoom webinar process. When we get closer to that section, I'll remind you to do that. But if you have questions during that time, it would kind of put them in there, and then we'll try to go through those before the hour is up. So let me start a little bit of kind of talking a little bit about, why the Washington Conference is critical. And I think this year, obviously, with everything else going on in 2020, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be different. But still, the activities, the action, the need for having a Washington Conference is still very critical. Sharing your story. I mean, a lot of members of Congress, the administration, others, we've been spending a lot of time talking with them about the impact of COVID has had on the industry. So having these personalized stories during the week, during your congressional virtual visits will be very important to relay kind of what we've been telling about, what's happening in COVID related to, during these visits with members of Congress. We're going to have over 12 hours of programming. This includes, and I'll talk about that later, excuse me, including our general sessions, our education. We have 3 general sessions, 6 education sessions, and 3 networking events that I think will be very exciting for everybody to participate in. Our general sessions are going to be filled with, on-topic issues, some about the election, also talking with members of Congress of how they're dealing with their new environment that they're dealing with during this COVID, and how they're working on Capitol Hill. Again, I mentioned the virtual March on Capitol Hill earlier. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But this will be a very unique opportunity, different than what you've participated in here in person. I think it's going to be work very well. In particular, not just seeing your member of Congress, but also potentially participating in other members of Congress and senators' meetings that are in different parts of the country, different states, different regions of your state, kind of to learn and listen to what they're thinking about some of the issues that we're talking about. Also, cost effective. This is very, again, interesting. I mean, we're asking folks to pay $4.95, or if you have 3 or more, it's $3.95. But more importantly, a lot of you I know who are on the call today and on the webinar today, we're already planning to attend. And think about the cost savings that you're having right now with a $500 plane ticket, $300 of hotel rooms, if not more, $100 to $200 of dining. That's a lot of money that you're saving by just participating in this virtually. And we'd like to also recommend, that's why we're doing a special promotion of 3 or more, to use some of that savings to help other people in your company, in your operations, in your business, in your organization to participate in the Washington Conference as well. And finally, and I'll talk about this again, about the policy issues. If you think about March, where we were, and with the sudden shutdown of the entire country, and what has happened since that time. There's been a lot of really good work here in Washington, D.C. by United Fresh, by our partner organizations throughout the country in the produce industry, really to drive resources back into the industry to help address some of the COVID-related challenges that we have. Again, I'll talk about that shortly, but it's something to remember, like over $4.5 billion has been driven back into the industry in terms of federal resources at this moment, which is unprecedented in this time when we're trying to compete with attention from all different parts of the business communities across the country to get the attention of Congress, to get the attention of administration. You know, we have been very successful, and not just United Fresh, but a lot of our colleagues throughout the produce industry have been very successful to get that attention. So having the Washington conference in September, reminding members of Congress about the importance of our industry and the business, this is why we have the conference. This is why we're going to continue to have this conference here this year, even though it's going to be virtual. So now I'd like to turn it over to Mark Klompien. As most of you know, he is the president and CEO of the United Potato Growers of America. And more importantly to us and to me and to the Washington, D.C., United Fresh D.C. crowd, he is the chairman of our United Fresh Government Relations Council. And Mark wanted to share a few comments about why it's important to be part of this conference this year, not just this year, but many years, and kind of reflect on some of the things that he has been experiencing during this challenging time. So Mark, let me turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Robert. I appreciate that. And thanks to all of you for being on this call. You're already obviously recognizing some of this importance of being engaged that Robert's talking about, or you wouldn't be on the call today. So I thank you very much for that. And Robert, thanks for running through those things to start us off. So yeah, like Robert said, I'm in the potato industry, United Potato Growers of America. And I've been coming to the Washington conference for United Fresh for, I think it's been probably 8 or 9 years, I guess. And just so you know, the potato industry also does its own kind of march on DC, so to speak, fly-in, we call it, and we usually do that in February. So we have that opportunity with our own individual industry as well. And many of you have that with your own specific sectors of the industry as well, of course. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to spend a little time talking about that importance. And even during these COVID times, right? So as they say, these unprecedented times, I think that's now, Robert, a drinking game on Zoom meetings. Anytime somebody says unprecedented times, somebody has to take a shot. So I can't see all of you, so I'm just going to take it on faith that when I say unprecedented times, you're all taking a shot at tequila. So,
but only potato vodka, right, Mark?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, potato vodka, I should have said. Yeah, we don't have potato tequila yet.
Yeah.
So when I started coming, like I said, 8 or 9 years ago, I used to kind of think, you know, you're just kind of a cog walking up on the hill, going to see your legislators, your congressional representatives, and that maybe this was kind of useless. Kind of had the attitude sometimes, you know, nothing really gets done anyway, so why are we doing this? And actually, it's really the inverse of that. It really couldn't be more important. I've come to realize, certainly, and it's sometimes, a lot of times, it's those behind the scenes things that happen that aren't out in the news. When you read the news, yeah, you think maybe nothing ever gets done, but it might be something more small or minor in an appropriation bill. It might be something more minor that doesn't make headlines in the farm bill. It's very important to our industry. And those are the kind of things that you don't see or read about necessarily, but that are incredibly important to our specific industry, the specialty crop industry. And so when we're up there advocating for those kind of things are getting through the congressional representatives, the members, or even their staffers are hearing those things and representing those things then for us on those pieces of legislation that then benefit our industry. So that's certainly one of the ways that this is very important. It's also a matter of the fact that numbers matter, right? So our specialty crop industry and United Fresh, what they do is a big chunk of people that come up and advocate for for these things that are important to us. And so those, when I say those numbers matter, when they see a lot of us coming into those offices and a really good turnout, they know that it's important to us, and they know the reasons why when they hear those things. So the more of us that go and do that and are engaged, the more they see that, the more clout and the more power, so to speak, that our industry demonstrates, the specialty crop industry and United Fresh fruit and vegetable growers in particular. So that's really an important piece of it as well. Just as an example of that, and Robert will probably touch on this, but since the pandemic started back in earnest back in mid-March, I guess it was, we've secured, I think, Robert, it's well north of $4 billion directly for the specialty crop sector of agriculture, and those kind of things and that kind of funding and that type of stuff couldn't be done without having some doors open to us and some clout, so to speak, and some of that power that we're talking about. So, and that's in things like, and I think Robert will get into these too, of what we've accomplished, but things like the Farm to Families, the food box program, things like the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, that's otherwise known as CFAP, the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, all of those things, very important to our industry. And again, all those things happen because of foundations that we've laid previous to this, and those relationships we've developed with those offices. So speaking of that relationship development, that's an incredibly important part of this too, as you go every year, hopefully, and at least once a year, maybe a few times a year, but meet with your congressional delegation. And even if it's not a member, even if it's their staffers, their legislative directors, or ag assistants, or chief of staff, you start to develop a relationship with those folks. And then you can, when something comes up, maybe in your own specific industry or for the specialty crop industry as a whole, you can call on them and they know you. They'll pick up the phone or answer an email and take that feedback from you. So that's a really important part of it. Just as a quick example of that, in my own industry, in the potato industry, just recently, the potato industry has been trying to gain access to the fresh potato market in Mexico now for a number of years. And just recently, we had a little bit of an opening. We thought it's been held up in a number of different channels, courts and political things, but we had an opportunity to talk to USDA about that and kind of make an impact. And very, very quickly, we mobilized 3 or 4 senators from potato growing states to write a letter to the Secretary of Ag, Sonny Perdue, to help us with that and kind of make our case and our point. And we couldn't do that if we didn't have, those prior relationships and them knowing the importance of these issues to us and to our industry. So that's just kind of one example of that. And then it's when you go and make these pitches and these talks with folks. Personal examples, Robert alluded to this as well, but personal examples are really important of the impact of certain issues or what we're advocating for on individual growers. I have a potato grower in southern Idaho just last year that made a very compelling personal plea and a very compelling case with a congressional office in terms of getting research and development funding in the approach bill for something that was very near and dear to his heart. And he made a very personal plea and case for that, and that went a long way as well. So when you're doing those kind of things, even though you might think from the broad picture, from a 30,000-foot view, things aren't getting done or you're not doing any good, let me tell you that they absolutely are. And when you're engaged in that and you participate in these kind of events, hopefully we get back to, of course, to live in the future, but even in this year, how incredibly important it is to stay engaged and stay in front of those offices and continue to develop those relationships. And this year, and Robert's going to talk about some of the advantages even in our current circumstance that we have with this kind of one-off year where we're doing it virtually. Then there are some distinct advantages to that. So we're going to be able to see that as well in this year and then going forward. As I say, it's just incredibly important to stay engaged. And so With that, I thank all of you again for your attendance here today and for listening to us here this morning or this afternoon. And I'll kind of turn it back to you, Robert, or take any questions. I don't know if we have anything in chat or if anybody has anything they wanted to ask for now.
We're good right now, and we'll again, if you have questions for Mark or myself as we get near the end, we've got some time saved for that to do some Q&A. But Mark, that was a great example.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for doing that and saying those kind words about some of the efforts that we're doing. And again, I cannot stress, just like in any other years, the importance of having that direct interaction, with their elected officials, and not just, for new things, but remind them and thank them for what they've done thus far for our industry. There's a lot of people out there, as you said, working constantly to help our industry, and we need to make sure that they're thanked as well as, what we're looking for ahead. So pivoting a little bit to some of the things we're going to be working on. So let me talk for a couple of minutes about what we think is going to be happening in September. And I say think because it has been a crazy time this summer. I think many of us coming in July really felt that there was going to be a big push before they went home for their August recess, before the conventions, the political conventions. There would be a fourth stimulus package that was going to be negotiated by the Democrats, Republicans, and the president and the administration. As you know, as of now, that has not happened. In fact, there's been very little discussion. Now both the House and Senate have gone home. Obviously, this week is a Democratic convention. Next week is the Republican convention, so nothing's really going to happen then. So that really puts a really big spotlight on September and what has to get done. And there's really two major things that need to get done in September. First, I want to remind you that even though they're coming back in September, there's really only 15 days they are in session. So that is important to remember because that's such a tight time frame. And there's the two major things they must get done is a new stimulus package. We call it COVID-4, that we hope will be negotiated in September, but also they have to keep the government running. So as many of you know, and many of you who have attended past Washington conference, there've been a few years where the government shut down while you were all in town. And it's been kind of interesting to be a part of that halfway through the conference. This year is no different. So not just only getting a stimulus package done before the election, but keeping the government running past September 30th. As many of that's their fiscal year, that's when it ends. So those will be probably the two major things that they will be working on while we are here, while we're doing our virtual meeting in September. The other thing is everybody's going to be looking coming off the political conventions with an eye towards November 3rd. So I think that's another important part of what we're going to be talking about during our conference. And as people are looking for their own re-elections, it looks like right now the Democrats are pretty safe in the House to retain that, but the real battle right now is a toss-up of who's going to control the Senate and who's going to obviously be the next president of the United States. It's anybody's guess. There's a lot of time left, 80-something days. You may not think that's a lot of time, but we haven't even got to the debates that are going to be happening over the next in August through September, the presidential debates, the vice presidential debates. So a lot will be going on. A lot of attention will be going on when we're here for the Washington conference virtually. So what are some of the major issues that we're looking at? So Mark and I have mentioned a few of these things. Mark mentioned the CFAP program. So these are the things we think are most important for the industry. And a lot of this will be tied up in the negotiations related to the COVID-4 stimulus package. As Mark mentioned, the direct payments to growers, that program has been very successful. It continues to grow in its importance for our industry. And so that'll be a program that right now the House and the Senate both have competing bills related to a COVID-4 package that address that direct payments to growers. Mark mentioned extending the Farm to Families program. As most of you know, That program has had a third iteration of funding. This is the last and final amount of funding that is currently available. So there's been a lot of questions also about farm to families, especially on Capitol Hill. I know, and a lot of us know, and a lot of you on the call know, or on the webinar know, that this has been a very successful program, not just for our industry, but for those who are most in need. The question is, will it get tied up in the political discussions between Democrats and Republicans? There's been a lot of back and forth on that. So we need to really provide a message of why this program is important, why it's been successful, why it's helped the supply chain create some stability in our business sector, and why we potentially need to continue it going through the remainder of this year, because there's still an unknown of how the economy is going to recover remainder of this year and into 2021. Another new program that we're looking at is creating a new program to address the costs associated with investments to protect workers during COVID pandemic. So that's something that a new bill has just been introduced in the last few weeks called the Food Supply Protection Act. And this legislation really will provide grants and loans for additional cold storage, transportation, personal protective equipment or PPE, infrastructure, and to support, to really support the challenges and the cost investment that has been invested by our industry and a lot of other industries to help protect their employers during this COVID pandemic. Also, the Paycheck Protection Program that again, Mark mentioned, expanding the utilization of that program. So more, what we're hearing more and more is, why can't some of the expenses that are related to not just keeping employees on staff, but some of the working capital and things like that a company has to experience, can they be included in a PPP funding as terms of a part of the forgivable part of the Paycheck Protection Program. Also, some of you are familiar with this tax credit for uncollectible debt and lost product. That's called the PLUS Act, or the Provide Liquidity for Uncollectible Sales Act, PLUS. That's been introduced in the House. And this would basically provide a tax credit to produce distributors to cover uncollectible debt for products that they were shipped to establishments prior to the COVID-19 related shutdowns, but have yet to not be paid for. There is still a big chunk of unpaid debt out there in the supply chain, from the restaurant and other hospitality sector to those food service distributors, even down to the growers, that still is out there because of the sudden and urgent shutdown of the country during March. And we need to really figure out ways how that debt can be dealt with. And then finally, the liability and essential worker relief legislation. An example of that is called the Frontline Act, again, been introduced in the Senate. It will provide essential workers a suspension of federal income taxes for up to an annual income cap, and the federal payroll tax suspension for essential workers who earn up to $50,000 annually. So that's another bill that we're looking at trying to get included in the COVID bill. So there's current programs in place like direct payments, farm to families, PPP, but there's 2 or 3 other new pieces of legislation that have been introduced and issues we're trying to push to get into this new COVID-4 package that would really help the industry continue to recover from the pandemic. So Mark mentioned some of the current programs, and this is really kind of a slide to show you why this is so important and we continue these programs. Again, what we mentioned here is like for instance, the Paycheck Protection Program, which has given over $2.7 billion to our industry, to just the fresh produce industry, in terms of loans and loans to over 28,000 industry members who have used this program. 763 produce wholesalers, over 2,100 produce growers and shippers have utilized this program. It's been a very critical tool. As I mentioned again, farm to families, $1.7 billion of fresh produce has been distributed to those most in need. Unprecedented amount, historical amount of produce, especially fresh produce, that has been over from March until August, over a 5 to 6 month time frame, or at least a 5-month time frame, that much produce has been moved through the supply chain to those most in need. And these companies and the growers they work with in the supply chain, up through the nonprofit institutions who are helping distribute food, really has been a great program that helps those in need. Mark mentioned the CFAP program, the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, or CFAP. We've had over 8,000, almost 9,000 applications that have been approved for fruit and vegetables, and the amount of $425 million has been distributed to growers. That's over $49,000 per applicant. Again, these are programs that when there have been losses, there have been impacts related to revenue. These programs have come in to help at least create some relief for the industry. And then finally, the nutrition programs, we've seen about $246 million invested in nutrition programs. That includes USDA purchases of about $125 million. There have been waivers for the fresh fruit and vegetable program. The WIC program has increased, is going to be increasing the amount that can be bought for fruits and vegetables. All of these programs have been critical as we speak. Now the question is, in September, can we continue these programs? Can we build on these programs and add some new things to this, to the next COVID package? And that's why, again, the Washington Conference is going to be so critical in having you and many others of your colleagues participate in the conference. So speaking of the Washington Conference, let me pivot quickly for a little bit to kind of the schedule of events. What you're seeing here right now is really a look at the 4 days of the Washington Conference. Very traditional, very, if you've been to the Washington Conference before, it's pretty much very similar to what we've had in person before. So on Monday, we're really spending a lot of time in our expert council and board meetings, market segment board meetings. Then that evening, we'll have a volunteer leadership community network event. And for the Monday, we want to remind you, and this has gone out already, and we want to tell folks that if you are a registrant for the Washington Conference and you don't serve on the boards or councils, you're allowed to participate in these. We will be sending you links to participate in some of these board meetings, in these expert council meetings, so you can sit in on the Government Relations Council meeting or the Food Safety Council meeting or the Grower Shipper Board meeting. There's a lot of different, councils and boards that are going to be meeting on Monday that you can sit in on as a registrant for the Washington Conference. Tuesdays, we're going to really kick off the conference. We have an opening general session. Secretary Perdue has been invited. I was talking with his office today. They're very excited about the event. They're working on the schedule to make sure he can attend this or attend it or attend virtually, I guess, so to speak. So that's very exciting. Then on Wednesday for our general sessions, we have our election focused sessions. So we'll have Frank Luntz, who starts the programming, who's a political analyst and has spoken at the Washington Conference several times. Will show us kind of what's happening on the ground in terms of polls and the trends that are going on both in the presidential and congressional elections. And then we've invited, and we're expecting to hopefully announce that in the next couple of weeks once the conventions are over with, the political conventions are over with. We invited a surrogate from President Trump's campaign, but also Vice President Biden's campaign has somebody who's being invited. And we're going to have them spend about 10 or 15 minutes talking about what they see coming in an ongoing Donald Trump administration, but also if Vice President Biden wins, a new Biden administration. And then finally on Thursday, we're going to bring back a panel of folks, of several members of Congress on the Democratic and Republican side to sit down and talk with you and have a discussion about how COVID, how the new virtual environment in Congress has changed their way they're doing work, how they interact with their constituents, how's it worked in a bipartisan way to get things done, unlike when they're usually on the Hill or in offices or having dinner at night or on the floor of Congress, when they can have that interaction. That's a lot different now. So how are they making those bipartisan efforts work? So again, I mentioned also as part of the education session was 6 different education sessions. So again, they cover a very broad spectrum of what we're going to be focusing on. I mentioned, some of the areas like immigration, talking with some of the folks in other countries, talking about how they're addressing responses to COVID outbreak. We have an interesting discussion with Frank Yanis and FDA about the partnership between the produce industry and FDA. We're looking at nutrition programs again. We'll have a lot of talk about some of those programs like the Farm to Families program and some of the other programs that are important. We've got another interesting panel that's going to look at other, like the seafood industry and some other parts of the industry, how their industries are dealing with the dairy industry, the seafood industry, and others, how they're dealing with the COVID environment, managing in their sectors. And then finally, as I mentioned, the networking sessions in Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings. Again, I mentioned the volunteer leader community networking event on Monday night. Then on Tuesday, this is going to be our up and coming rising leaders meetup networking session. How are they dealing with, you know, their current business environment, their work environment, dealing with the current situation. And then finally, Wednesday will be kind of that theme of election. We'll finish up with a big election night celebration. Hopefully it'll be a lot of fun. We'll have some polls, we'll have some interaction individually and collectively. You know, we're hoping to make that a really fun event, even though it's going to be virtual, but it'll be a fun, exciting event for the conference in terms of our sessions. So let me switch now to our virtual March on Capitol Hill. And I think, you know, how I look at this is a very unique opportunity, and Mark mentioned this as well. There are obviously some disadvantages, but certainly we're looking at this as a huge advantage to potentially broaden our scope, broaden our reach for you with members of Congress and, you know, participating in these meetings. So I think one of the major things that we are thinking of that will really make it unique and different and an opportunity is not only will you be able to visit with your members of Congress and senators, you also will be able to participate in additional meetings, selecting meetings throughout the time frame that we've had in place with other senators, other members of Congress from different parts of the country, different regions, you know, to hear their perspectives of what's happening with them and how they're looking at our issues as important. We've also, as many of you know who've been before, we're not cramming these meetings into a 3-hour period. It's actually over 6 days. So really, we're really starting the virtual March on Capitol Hill after the actual education and events that we're going to be hosting that first week. We think that you know, that may seem like a long time, but having those 6 days and having, you know, kind of be able to put these into your schedule, build a schedule around these over a 6-day period is going to be very beneficial for you, but also having that flexibility with members of Congress to have them kind of pick over days versus over hours, as we usually do, in trying to push that into 1 or 2 afternoons. I also mentioned, I think what's another important unique opportunity is the quality of visits with key decision makers. So not only are we trying to make sure that we pair up with your member of Congress and your constituent, but we're also looking at key decision makers. So the Speaker's office, the Majority Leader's office in the Senate, some of those key decision makers that'll be right in the middle of negotiations on many of these issues we just talked about and getting their insight. So you'll be allowed to do that. So we're trying to build those in as well. And a new thing that we're working on that we decided to add to the virtual March on Capitol Hill, so to speak, is we're also going to weave in some meetings with administration officials from different agencies, but also some embassy visits. So many of you, or some of you may have participated last year in some of the, you know, we had 3 embassy sign-up visits that you could do. We're going to do the same thing this year, have several of those embassy visits, meeting with the ag attaches and others they want to include as part of that week-long congressional visit. So not only will you get to visit and get to have meetings with your members of Congress and senators, but also some of the administration officials we think are important for them to hear from you and you to hear from them on issues ranging from, again, from agriculture to trade to labor to environmental issues, things like that. We're going to weave those into that week as well. The key thing you need to remember, however, is if you want to participate in any of these virtual Zooming with Congress or virtual March on Capitol, you must be registered for TWC to Washington Conference to participate. That is the key thing here, that you cannot RSVP for any of these meetings until you register, and then you will be receiving a link to be able to register for your meeting you want to really go to, that's your member of Congress, but also RSVP for some of the other meetings that we have available. So as I mentioned, we're going to do a sneak peek. Here's kind of a screenshot of what you're going to see once this goes live. On the left-hand side is the actual schedule that we have thus far of meetings, but also on the right-hand side, you'll see, if you see the view profile, you click that on, and then you're going to be able to go into a profile of the members of Congress we've got meetings with, to see if you're interested. You know, a lot of you may be in Dan Newhouse's district, but if you're not, and you know Dan Newhouse, and if you're not, but you're kind of interested in seeing what he's about, you know, you can look at his profile and say, oh, that might be an interesting person to talk with and listen into while they do their meeting on whatever day that they're doing that meeting. So what I'm going to do now is try and show you what it really looks like in real time. This is, again, kind of the first time we've tried this. Hang on just a second. Let me get to it. All right. Hang on just. Nope, that's not it. Let's see. Here we go. Mark, can you see that? You see that? See this? See this? Okay, good. So once this is going to go live, most likely next week for those. And what you can see here is we've already built out over 25 different meetings. I'm scrolling probably too fast for you. And these meetings have already been set up with time and dates. There are several meetings here at the end that we've confirmed the meeting, but we're still working on the date and time. So again, if you register for the Washington conference, you'll be then able to go in and start RSVPing for these meetings. So let's say you're not sure about like going to meet Joe Courtney in Connecticut. You're from California or Florida or Texas. Like, who's this Joe Courtney guy? I really don't know him that well, but let me look at his profile. So you'll click on his profile, and this will pop up a profile that we've done. His issues, I mean, you may not know, but he's members of the Special Caucus. He's an important member of the Organic Caucus as well. He's on the Education and Labor Committee. So you'll see we've kind of put together some of about his bio, his district info, what's his district look like, some of the bills we think are important of how he's voted on them, and then key bills that he's actually even sponsored that we think are important to include. And if you want to dig deeper, there are links to his his page on Capitol, or his congressional page that shows more about Joe Courtney. We've also included as a link here the fresh fruit and vegetable state profiles. I think you guys are familiar with those, so you can see how the fresh fruit and vegetable industry is working in the industry. But again, at the end here, you must register to attend these meetings. And this leads you back, if you haven't registered, you want to go to these meetings, this leads you back to the registration page. So that kind of gives you a sense of what we're doing with this. We're excited about this. We think this is very user-friendly. At least the staff has worked very hard to make this very user-friendly and to better understand. And then it gives you a good profile of the members. And this is not just the only members. We're building this out every day. So as more members we confirm, we will be adding those to the schedules. And then as a registrant, you will get information about the new schedule that's been updated. So that really shows that, kind of that part. Let me go back now to the, no, I don't want to do that one. All right, Mark, are you good? You can see the virtual March, the 2 pages?
Yes.
Okay,
yep, it's good.
Great. So let me move ahead here and kind of, start. And again, if you have questions, start typing them now. We're getting to that point where we want to do questions. But so what can you do? So if you haven't registered, I know several of you, or a number of you are already on this call, already registered. So thank you very much in advance. What can you do? So register yourself. I mentioned kind of the deal that we think is very economically viable for the industry, and cost savings is important. I know during these times. Get some parts of your team also to have an experience. This is an opportunity that if they haven't been able to fly with you or come to you to Washington, this is an opportunity for them to learn virtually and understand why what we do is so important in Washington, D.C. for the industry and how important a role they can play in this process. Obviously, contact peers in the industry, and then finally considering sponsorship. This is last year's sponsors that we had last year. We're building our sponsorship list now. I'm sure some of you may have already been contacted by John or Mary Alameda or Angela. And so this is kind of the list from last year. So if you're from one of these companies on the phone call, we thank you for last year's sponsorship. I hope you'll consider this year as well. So with that, I'm going to do some questions and discussions. So the first question, Mark, you can chime in on this. Given this election year, will people be available for a Zoom meeting during the March and what it will be difficult? A Zoom meeting during the March on Washington. Yes.
Yeah, I think Robert, yeah, that's a good question from Doug. So I think he's kind of what he's getting at there is, and what do you think about this? Do you think we'll get mostly members? I know sometimes the in-person visits, you get a staff member or something, sometimes, or the chief of staff. Oftentimes you get a member, but sometimes you don't. Do you think this will be more members, and will they be available?
I think it's going to be, again, I didn't mention that probably in the flexibility, but in terms of giving them more days, the members are going to be more available during that time to have meetings in a Zoom platform, kind of like we're doing right now. And so I think we will. I mean, we've have the vast majority of those meetings we've already scheduled. I think there might be 2 or 3 that we have staff allocated for right now. The rest are all member direct meetings. So we're excited about that. We will post on the meetings if it's staff only versus the members. So if you don't see anything by their names, you should assume the member is going to be at that meeting, and then we'll post if it's locked in as a staff person. So that'll be another feature we'll include as we continue to build out the congressional schedule.
Yeah, and I think the last part of Doug's question kind of alludes to the fact that it is an election year, obviously, and I guess concern for perhaps their attention span. I don't know how many of them. Well, obviously all the House members are in cycle, and I guess a third of the senators. I don't know how many of the senators were visiting or up for re-election. But yeah, there's that concern about their attention span.
Yeah, Mark, I think it's interesting because, and we'll probably hear that some in September. I think a lot of members are figuring out how they're connecting with their constituents. So they're spending more time in environments like this. And trying to connect with their their constituents. So I do think we're going to get their attention. I do think we're coming, again, the conference is coming at a point where they are making some very important decisions, for many things, keeping the government running, obviously the COVID package we talked about. So I do think there's several areas that I think, I believe we're going to have good attention. I can tell you from a personal perspective, I've participated in a number of meetings like this with members of Congress, either one-on-one or with a small group of members, or even in a committee setting. So a couple of times I've had opportunity to speak to a group of 15 members that are like the House Ag Committee members or the Ways and Means Committee members to talk about, again, the impact this is having on our industry. And I think that's an interesting, so you're seeing remote locations from all over the country with 12 or 15 or 20 different members of Congress who are then, talking about and asking questions about what's the impact in my area, what's the impact nationally in our issues. So I do think they're looking at ways that they can enhance their visibility. If they can't see people in person, they can't really have rallies, as we know, in some cases. So how are they going to reach out to members, their constituents? And I think this is one of the ways that at least we've heard thus far is a good way they can do that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of them will look at this as an opportunity for themselves for engagement with their constituency, just like you say. So yeah, I think it'll be good, and I think we'll be probably more likely maybe to get a member, given the scheduling advantages you have with this too, not trying to cram it into just a half a day on Capitol Hill. So yeah.
And look, I mean, I think, I know we're having a conversation again. If anybody else has any questions, please put them into the Q&A section. I think that we all know the March is the most important part of the conference. It is certainly awesome that we get great speakers and great education sessions. They're very important to kind of get a framework to understand. I think the fact that we're doing the education and opening and general sessions before we even go to Capitol Hill all in one 3-day period, and then be able to go to the Hill and talk about these issues, not just one day in the House, one day in the Senate, or a combination of the two, will really help us, help the attendees get a better, firm understanding of the issues. One of the things that I've been asked over the last several weeks is, will we have talking points? Will we have? Yes, that's all going to be done. You'll be given a package of stuff related to talking points, the issues that we're going to be focusing on. We're still in development of that and what's the best way to present that to you. But one of the key things to do is make sure that you can attend or have folks from your team attend the education sessions, so you can learn more in depth over an hour on these issues, but then be able to come out with the best talking points that you think are important for you to, as a person, as an individual, but also as a company spokesperson, to talk about these issues and how they're impacting your company. And something else has popped up. Oh, same question. That's okay. It was Doug. So, Mark, talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, for a few minutes before we kind of close things down, talk a little bit about how, your industry, your company has been impacted by the COVID environment.
Yeah, that's a good question, Robert. It's interesting how things have kind of evolved during this whole cycle over the last, what's it been, I guess 5 months, a little over 5 months. If you go, say, mid-March was kind of the inception point of when things kind of came crashing down, so to speak. So early on in the cycle, of course, when everybody was in lockdown, I'm sure it was similar to a lot of the produce industry and a lot of the fruits and vegetable specific commodities, where potatoes at retail saw a real big surge of demand, and everybody was eating at home, of course, and no restaurants. So on the retail side of the potato industry, they saw a big surge of buying and demand. Of course, some of you probably remember seeing the pictures of store shelves empty with not being able to find bags of potatoes and that kind of thing. So the food service sector, of course, was the flip side of that. As that shut down, that virtually shut down the entire food service part of the potato industry, just like all of your other industries, I'm sure. And so a lot of that shifted into the retail sector, but some it's hard to do that turn that on a dime in terms of packaging materials and packaging equipment and labor issues and all those things. And so that all came into play as we were trying to navigate through this thing. But then as it evolved, the retail demand has stayed high, not as high as those initial spikes in the first 3 to 4 weeks of the deal, but certainly stayed at elevated levels. We've also seen the food service demand start to come back a little bit as the reopening start. That goes hand in hand. But of course, the big event type things, sporting events and stadium events and conventions, just like our own convention, of course, being canceled. All those mass type feeding events are still not occurring, even though the restaurant sector is seeing a little bit of a comeback, and so that food service channel is kind of rebuilding there a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of been the cycle of how we've seen it evolve so far with the potato industry. And of course, we're trying to project and determine how it's going to continue to evolve. And it kind of ties into what we're talking about, right? So these things you're talking about, the benefits to growers that were impacted and harmed by the actions of what happened from the government and other entities, shutdown of food service, all those things, those impacts is what we're we're talking about here that are very important to this upcoming Washington conference. And so I think all those things you went through, Robert, are going to continue to be important to our industry and the rest of the fresh produce industry as well, in terms of relief for growers that were devastated in some cases. Some growers, that's not the case, so it can affect everybody equally. So that's something definitely have to keep in mind. But yeah, that was kind of the evolution in our industry of that.
Great. Mark, thanks. That was a good overview of that. So I hope this has been helpful to everybody. I think we both, Mark, thank you again for participating. What I want to remind you is the next 2 weeks, we've got 2 other webinars that we're focusing on. And every week, we're going to try to dig deeper and deeper into the virtual conference, how it's going to work, dig deeper into the congressional visits as much as we can, talk about some of the issues, again, going in a little deeper as we have in the past as part of these webinars, but really try and continue to educate you, your colleagues, and other people in the industry of why it's important to be part of the Washington Conference this year. So if you've got friends and colleagues and other people in your companies who want to participate in these webinars, please sign them up. You can sign up. I think we just sent a notice out yesterday and today about the upcoming webinars, so please register for them. With that, again, Mark, thank you. Thanks to the United Fresh team for the work they did behind the scenes for today. We will talk to you next week. So thank you again and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.